If you've ever worn a shamrock on St. Patrick's Day, gotten a Celtic knot tattoo, or seen the Irish harp on a coin, a passport, or even a pub sign, here's a question that sounds simple but isn't. Do you actually know what you're saying? Because these three symbols get thrown together like they all mean the same thing. Souvenir shops mash them into one Irish aesthetic. Social media calls everything Celtic. And over time, a lot of people ended up wearing symbols that communicate something very different than they think. So in this video, we're going to separate them clearly: the shamrock, the Celtic knot, and the harp. What each one represents, where the meaning really comes from, why people confuse them, and how to choose the right one if you want your symbol to match your message. And stick around, because by the end, you'll be able to look at any Irish-style design and instantly tell which story it's trying to tell: identity, connection, or nationhood. Let's start with the one everybody thinks they understand. The shamrock. Most people hear shamrock and think Ireland, luck, green, and St. Patrick's Day. And yes, all of that is part of the modern meaning. But the shamrock became powerful for a deeper reason. It's simple, it's local, and it became a symbol you could carry anywhere. A shamrock is typically understood as a small three-leaf plant. The key detail is the number 3. That threeness is what made it unforgettable, because the most famous story attached to the shamrock is connected to St. Patrick. The popular tradition says St. Patrick used the shamrock as a teaching tool. 3 leaves, 1 plant, an easy way to explain the Christian idea of the Trinity. Whether every detail of that story happened exactly as people repeat it today is less important than what the story did over time. It made the shamrock more than a plant. It turned it into a symbol that blended Irish life with Irish Christianity, and it gave ordinary people something small and recognizable to represent their identity. That's why the shamrock became so portable. It's not a crown. It's not a weapon. It's not a complicated emblem. It's a little green shape you can draw on a paper, stitch onto clothing, carve into wood, or pin to your chest. It traveled with Irish people through hardship, migration, and diaspora. And eventually, it became one of the loudest visual signals on earth for Irish. Now, what does it represent today? First, Irish identity and pride, especially in a broad, public way. It's the symbol you wear to say, "I'm Irish," or "I'm celebrating Ireland," even if you can't trace your family line back 500 years. The shamrock is inclusive. It's a symbol of connection by celebration. Second, luck. This meaning got amplified over time, especially outside Ireland. But here's an important clarification that many people miss. The shamrock is not the same thing as a 4-leaf clover. People use those interchangeably, but they're not the same symbol. The 4-leaf clover is the classic rare equals lucky idea. The shamrock is the 3-leaf symbol tied to Irish identity and St. Patrick's tradition. When someone says, "I wore a shamrock for luck," they might be mixing the two. So if you're choosing a symbol and you want it to say luck, people will probably still get it. But the shamrock's deeper message is more like this: Irishness, tradition, and a kind of simple resilience. Something small that represents something huge. Now, here's the first reason people get confused. A lot of people assume the shamrock is an ancient Celtic symbol in the same way the knot is. And it's not really that. The shamrock's strongest symbolism, as most people understand it today, is tied to later Irish tradition and Irish identity, especially Christian Irish tradition and national cultural identity. It's not the same category as those intricate, older interlacing patterns. Which brings us to the second symbol. The Celtic knot. If the shamrock is loud and public, like a badge you pin on your chest, the Celtic knot is quiet and personal. It's the symbol people choose when they want meaning that feels timeless. A Celtic knot is an interlacing pattern. The lines weave over and under each other. And often, the shape has no clear beginning and no clear end. That single feature, the endless line, is what created the knot's most famous meaning. Continuity. Eternity. The idea that something doesn't break. That it loops and returns. That it continues. That's why people attach the knot to concepts like love, loyalty, family, and spiritual connection. It's also why it shows up in memorials. Because an endless pattern is a visual promise that something remains connected, even when people are separated by distance, time, or death. But here's where things get interesting. Not all Celtic knots are the same. Some designs are treated like general knotwork. Beautiful interlacing, often used as decoration. Others are specific patterns with specific names that carry popular modern interpretations. For example, you might have seen the Triquetra, a three-pointed knot often used to represent a triad, sometimes tied to the Trinity in Christianity, sometimes tied to triple concepts in myth and spirituality. You might see the Dara knot, often connected to strength and inner resilience. You might see shield knots, used as protective motifs in modern symbolic language. The important thing is this. The knot isn't one meaning. It's a language of patterns. And modern culture often reduces it to one sentence: it means eternity. That's not wrong, but it's incomplete. The knot can represent continuity, yes, but it can also represent interconnectedness. The weaving can symbolize how lives intertwine. How generations link. How identity isn't one straight line, but a braid of stories. That's why the knot is the go-to symbol for ancestry. When people want something that says, "My story didn't begin with me," they often choose knotwork. It signals lineage. The sense of being connected to a past that still shapes the present. And the knot also became strongly associated with insular art, the style of intricate designs you see in old manuscripts and stonework across the British Isles, including Ireland. It became part of a visual heritage that feels unmistakably Celtic to many people today. Now, here's the second reason people confuse symbols. Pop culture uses Celtic as a fantasy category. Movies, video games, tattoos, jewelry, everything gets labeled Celtic because it looks ancient or mystical. And then knotwork gets mixed with other interlacing traditions, like Norse-inspired designs. So you'll sometimes see people wear a knot thinking it's purely Irish, when in reality, the design language can overlap across regions and eras. That doesn't mean you can't wear it. It just means that the knot, as a category, is broader than many people realize. But the knot does communicate something very clearly. If the shamrock says, "I celebrate Ireland," the Celtic knot usually says, "I'm connected to something deeper. Something continuous. Something that lasts." It's less about a holiday vibe and more about identity, spirituality, and heritage. Now let's move to the third symbol, the one that might surprise you the most. The harp. When people see a harp, they often think it's just another pretty Irish emblem. They might associate it with music, pubs, or old-timey folk culture. But the harp is different from the other two in one major way. The harp isn't just cultural. It's official. The harp is a national symbol of Ireland. It's tied to state identity in a way the shamrock and knot are not. This is why the harp shows up on official seals, state branding, and historically on currency and formal documents. It carries the vibe of nationhood, sovereignty, and legitimacy. So when you see the harp, you're not just seeing Irish tradition. You're seeing Ireland. Not as an idea. As a nation. And it's not random that the harp became that symbol. Music in Irish tradition isn't just entertainment. Music carried stories. It carried memory. It carried history through times when writing wasn't always the way ordinary people kept record. The image of the harp ties into the older cultural role of bards and musicians. People who preserved identity through sound and story. So the harp speaks two languages at the same time. One is cultural heritage. The other is national identity. That's why the harp can feel more formal. More authoritative. More like a stamp than a decoration. And this leads to another common mistake. People treat the harp like a generic symbol, like it's basically interchangeable with a shamrock on a t-shirt. But the harp can be more specific than that. If the shamrock is Irish pride, and the knot is eternal connection, the harp is Ireland as a nation, its identity, culture, and sovereignty. So now we've got the three symbols clearly separated. But let's make it even clearer. Think of them as three different messages you can broadcast with one image. The shamrock says, Irish identity, celebration, tradition. It's a people symbol. It's a "we are here" symbol. It's often joyful and public. The Celtic knot says, connection, continuity, ancestry, eternity. It's a meaning symbol. It's personal. It's often intimate. The harp says, Ireland itself, heritage with authority. It's a nation symbol. It's formal. It's legacy. Now, why do people mix them up so much? Because modern branding blends them into one look. Tourism does it. Souvenir culture does it. Social media does it. And even well-meaning people do it without realizing there's a difference. A key reason is that symbols don't stay frozen. They evolve. They gather new meanings. The shamrock picked up luck. The knot became a universal tattoo symbol. The harp turned into a brand element in places that aren't official at all. And once symbols become popular, people use them because they look good. Not because they researched them. That's normal. But if you're someone who actually cares about heritage or meaning, the difference matters. So here's a quick way to choose the right one, depending on what you want to communicate. If you want a symbol that says, I'm Irish, or I'm celebrating Irish culture, or this is Irish pride in public, choose the shamrock. It's clear. It's widely recognized. It reads instantly. If you want a symbol that says, I'm connected, whether that's to family, ancestry, love, faith, or a lifelong bond, choose a Celtic knot. Especially if you choose a specific knot pattern that matches the meaning you want. And if you want a symbol that says, Ireland as a nation, or you're talking about Ireland's identity in a historical or official sense, choose the harp. It carries that weight. Now let's do a quick symbol spotting moment, because once you see this, you can't unsee it. Imagine a St. Patrick's Day shirt covered in little green three-leaf shapes. That's shamrock territory. It's saying celebration, Irishness, festive identity. Now imagine a ring with an interlacing pattern that seems endless. That's not territory. It's saying bond, continuity, connection. Now imagine a formal emblem with a harp, on a crest, a seal, a document, or something meant to look official. That's harp territory. That's nationhood and cultural authority. And when you understand that, something else becomes obvious. Wearing a symbol without knowing the meaning is like speaking a word in a language you don't understand. Most people will be polite. Many will assume you mean well. But sometimes, you might be saying something you didn't intend. Especially with tattoos. Because tattoos are permanent messages. A shamrock tattoo can mean Irish pride, family roots, celebration, or even just a personal connection to Ireland. A Celtic knot tattoo often signals deeper intent, connection, lineage, spirituality, eternity, or a bond that doesn't break. A harp tattoo can signal not only heritage and music, but also something closer to national identity, like you're aligning with Ireland itself as a cultural homeland. None of these are wrong. But they're different. And the difference is what makes symbolism powerful in the first place. Because symbols are shortcuts. They're tiny images that carry huge stories. So the next time you see these three symbols side by side, don't treat them like identical stickers. The shamrock is the badge. The knot is the bond. The harp is the nation. Now let me ask you something. Which one have you worn before? A shamrock, a knot, or a harp? And if you did, what did you think it meant at the time? Drop your answer in the comments, because I'm curious how many people were told the luck version, how many chose the eternal bond version, and how many didn't realize the harp was as official as it is. And if you want more videos like this, where we break down Irish symbols, myths, and identity in a way that's actually clear, subscribe to the channel, because the next one will go even deeper into symbols people wear without realizing what they're saying.